William Thompson, a well-respected local businessman, was found dead under mysterious circumstances in his home. The news spread like wildfire, leaving the townspeople in shock and disbelief. William's body was discovered by his wife, Rachel Thompson, who called the police in a state of frantic distress. The scene that awaited the detectives was both perplexing and chilling. William lay motionless in the living room with no visible signs of struggle or forced entry. The initial examination suggested a sudden, unexplained death, but something felt off to the seasoned investigators. Detective Emily Taylor and her partner, Detective David Collins, were assigned to the case. Both experienced and diligent, they knew that in a small town like Franklin, everyone had their secret, and sometimes those secrets could be deadly. As they began their investigation, the townsfolk watched with bated breath, eager to know what had happened to one of their own. Rumors began to swirl as the community speculated about the cause of William's untimely demise. Some whispered about his business dealings, while others hinted at personal troubles. Little did they know that the truth was far more sinister and tangled than they could ever imagine. As the detectives delved deeper into William's life and relationships, they uncovered a web of deceit, betrayal, and hidden motives that pointed to a shocking conclusion. William Thompson was a man of many facets. At 45, William had built a successful career as the owner of a local hardware store, Thompson Supplies, which had been a staple in Franklin for over 2 decades. Known for his generosity and commitment to the community, William was a beloved figure in town. He often donated to local charities and sponsored youth sports teams, earning him a reputation as a pillar of Franklin society. Despite his public persona, those who knew William well were aware of his private struggles. His marriage to Rachel had been under strain for several years. The couple had met in college and married young, but over time, the passion had waned, replaced by routine and occasional argument. Friends described William as hardworking and dedicated, but also as someone who could be distant and absorbed in his work. William's last known activities painted a picture of a man entrenched in his routine. He had spent the previous day at his store, attending to customers and managing inventory. He left work at his usual time, stopped briefly at a local diner for a cup of coffee, and then headed home. Surveillance footage confirmed that he arrived at his house at 6:45 p.m. that evening. William had planned to spend a quiet night with Rachel, watching television and discussing their upcoming vacation. However, Rachel reported that William had complained of feeling unwell shortly after dinner. He had retired to the living room to rest, and that was the last time she saw him alive. When she went to check on him later, she found him unresponsive and called 911. The initial autopsy report was inconclusive. There were no obvious signs of trauma or foul play. Toxicology results were pending. Detectives Taylor and Collins knew they had to dig deeper into William's life to uncover any potential clues that could explain his sudden death. They began by interviewing Rachel and those closest to William, hoping to piece together the events leading up to that fateful night. Rachel Thompson was the picture of grief when the detectives first interviewed her. At 42, she was a striking woman with auburn hair and piercing blue eyes, now red-rimmed from crying. Her distress seemed genuine, but Taylor and Collins knew better than take things at face value. They needed to understand her relationship with William and her potential role in his death. Rachel worked as a marketing manager for a local real estate firm, a job she had taken up after their 2 children, Lucas and Olivia, went off to college. Described by friends as outgoing and charismatic, Rachel was well-liked in the community. However, some noted that her marriage to William had been rocky. There were rumors of arguments and a growing emotional distance between them. When questioned about the night of William's death, Rachel recounted her version of events with a tremor in her voice. She described how William had complained of feeling ill after dinner and had decided to lie down in the living room. She had given him some space, thinking he needed rest, and had gone upstairs to read. Hours later, when she didn't hear from him, she went downstairs and found him unresponsive. Rachel's reaction to William's death was complex. She expressed deep sorrow and a sense of loss, but also hinted at frustration that had simmered beneath the surface of their marriage. She admitted that they had been going through a rough patch, but she insisted that she loved William and had hoped to work through their issues. As the detectives delved deeper, they noticed subtle inconsistencies in Rachel's statement. She seemed hesitant when discussing certain aspects of her relationship with William, and there were moments when her grief appeared almost performative. Taylor and Collins decided to explore further, focusing on Rachel's personal life and relationships outside her marriage. Their investigations soon led them to Andrew Parker, Rachel's coworker. Initial inquiries revealed that Rachel and Andrew had been spending a lot of time together, both in and out of the office. The nature of their relationship raised eyebrows, and the detectives suspected that there was more to the story than Rachel had let on. With this new lead, they began to unravel the threads of an affair that would cast a dark shadow over William's death and point to possible motives that were previously unseen. Detectives Taylor and Collins arrived at the Thompson residence the morning after William's body was discovered. The house, a modest two-story home on Maple Street, was cordoned off with police tape. Forensic teams were already at work, meticulously combing through every inch of the property for clues. Taylor, a seasoned detective with a keen eye for detail, started her examination in the living room, where William's body had been found. The room was neat, almost eerily so. William lay on the couch, his face serene as if he were merely asleep. There were no signs of a struggle, no obvious wounds or marks on his body. The initial assessment by the medical examiner suggested that William had died of unknown causes, pending a full autopsy. Collins, Taylor's partner, was outside speaking with the first responders. Burly man with a no-nonsense attitude, he had a knack for getting people to talk. He gathered statements from the paramedics and the patrol officers who had first arrived at the scene. None of them had seen anything out of the ordinary, and there were no immediate signs of forced entry or foul play. Inside, Taylor turned her attention to Rachel, who sat at the kitchen table clutching a tissue. Rachel's hands trembled as she recounted the events of the previous night. Her story was consistent with what she had told the 911 operator. William had felt unwell, and she had left him to rest, only to find him unresponsive later. Taylor noted the way Rachel's eyes darted around the room, avoiding direct contact. As they wrapped up their initial interviews, Collins spoke with several neighbors. Most described the Thompsons as a quiet couple who kept to themselves. Few mentioned hearing arguments on occasion, but nothing that had raised significant alarm. One neighbor, Mrs. Harris, an elderly widow who lived next door, recalled seeing William the evening before. He had seemed his usual self, waving as he walked to his front door. Back at the station, detectives reviewed their notes. They compiled a list of potential witnesses and persons of interest, starting with Rachel and expanding to friends, family, and coworkers. Preliminary evidence didn't point clearly in any direction. Taylor and Collins were determined to leave no stone unturned. Forensic analysis began to yield some results. The autopsy confirmed that William had not suffered from any external injuries. Toxicology tests, however, revealed trace amounts of a foreign substance in his system. This finding raised new questions about whether William's death was natural or if he had been deliberately poisoned. The detectives considered the possibility of an accidental overdose, but decided to focus on investigating any potential foul play. Meanwhile, Taylor and Collins continued to scrutinize Rachel's behavior and background. They requested her phone records and financial statements, looking for any anomalies. Rachel's initial shock and sorrow seemed genuine. The detectives knew that grief could mask many things. They needed to understand her motives, her relationships, and her state of mind in the weeks leading up to William's death. Their investigation soon took a critical turn when they discovered a series of text messages between Rachel and her coworker, Andrew Parker. The messages hinted at a relationship that was far more intimate than just colleagues. This revelation provided a new perspective on the case and prompted the detectives to delve deeper into Rachel's affair with Andrew, exploring how it might connect to William's untimely demise. The discovery of Rachel's affair with Andrew was a turning point in the investigation. The text messages between them were explicit and left little doubt about the nature of their relationship. Andrew, a suave and charming man in his early 40s, worked with Rachel at the real estate firm, and it was clear that their connection went beyond professional boundaries. Detectives Taylor and Collins decided to bring Rachel in for a second round of questioning. This time, they confronted her with the evidence of her affair. Rachel initially denied any wrongdoing, but when presented with the text messages, she broke down. Through tears, she admitted to the affair, claiming that it had started several months earlier. She insisted, however, that it had nothing to do with William's death. Rachel explained that she had felt lonely and unappreciated in her marriage. William had become increasingly distant, more focused on his business than on their relationship. She sought comfort and companionship in Andrew, who was attentive and understanding. The affair had been an escape, a way for her to feel alive again, but she maintained that she had never wanted any harm to come to William. Taylor and Collins knew that affairs could be powerful motivators for murder, but they needed more concrete evidence to link Rachel or Andrew to William's death. They decided to bring Andrew in for questioning. Andrew was cooperative but nervous. He confirmed the affair, describing it as a whirlwind romance that had provided solace to both him and Rachel. He claimed that he had no knowledge of William's death and had been at home on the night it happened, a fact that the detectives would need to verify. As the detectives delved deeper into the affair, they discovered that Rachel and Andrew had been planning to start a new life together. Emails and further text messages revealed discussions about leaving Franklin and moving to a different city. They had even looked into potential properties and job opportunities elsewhere. This painted a picture of a couple desperate to escape their current lives, raising further suspicions about their involvement in William's death. The affair added a layer of complexity to the case. Rachel's motive seemed clear. If she were free from her marriage, she could be with Andrew without the stigma of divorce in their conservative community. However, Taylor and Collins needed to establish a link between the affair and William's death. They began by re-examining the toxicology report, looking for any substances that could be traced back to Rachel or Andrew. The detectives also started to scrutinize Andrew's background more closely. They discovered that he had a history of financial troubles and had recently been involved in a legal dispute with a former employer. This revelation suggested that Andrew might have had his own motives for wanting William out of the picture, particularly if he believed that Rachel could provide financial stability. With these new leads, Taylor and Collins were determined to uncover the truth. They needed to build a case that connected the dots between the affair, the motives, and the opportunity for either Rachel or Andrew to have orchestrated William's death. The stakes were high, and the pressure was mounting, but the detectives were resolute in their pursuit of justice. Andrew presented himself as a confident and composed individual, but under the scrutiny of the detectives, cracks began to appear in his facade. Andrew was a real estate agent who had joined the same firm as Rachel a year prior. 41, he was known for his charm and persuasive skills, which had earned him a reputation as one of the top agents in Franklin. However, his personal life was far less stable. During his interview, Andrew maintained that his relationship with Rachel was purely about mutual emotional support. He admitted to falling in love with her, but insisted that they had no plans to harm William. He claimed to have been at his apartment on the night of William's death, providing an alibi the detectives would need to verify. As Taylor and Collins dug into Andrew's background, they found several red flags. Andrew had moved to Franklin after a series of failed business ventures in larger cities. He had accumulated significant debt and had been sued by a former business partner over a failed investment. Financial records showed that Andrew was living beyond his means, struggling to keep up with his debts and maintain his lifestyle. Further investigation into Andrew's phone records and emails revealed frequent, secretive communications with Rachel. They often discussed their dissatisfaction with their current lives and fantasized about a future together. In one particularly revealing email, Andrew wrote about his desperation to start anew and his frustration with the obstacles in their way. While this was not direct evidence of a murder plot, it added to the narrative that he had a strong motive to eliminate William. The detectives also uncovered that Andrew had recently taken out a sizable life insurance policy on himself, naming Rachel as the beneficiary. This discovery was particularly suspicious, suggesting that Andrew might have been planning for a future that included financial security, possibly derived from Rachel's newfound widowhood. To verify Andrew's alibi, Taylor and Collins visited his apartment complex. The building manager confirmed that Andrew had been seen entering his apartment around 7 p.m. on the night of William's death, but there were no witnesses to confirm his presence there for the entire evening. This left a window of opportunity that the detectives couldn't ignore. As they continued to interrogate Andrew, his story began to show inconsistencies. He stumbled over details about his whereabouts and interactions with Rachel. Taylor and Collins pressed harder, using psychological tactics to unsettle him. Andrew's composure started to fray, and he became increasingly defensive. In a tense moment during questioning, Andrew blurted out that Rachel had been the one to suggest they could be together sooner if William were out of the picture. This accusation shifted the focus back to Rachel and raised questions about who was truly orchestrating the events leading up to William's death. Was Andrew trying to deflect blame, or was there a more sinister conspiracy at play? With both Rachel and Andrew under intense scrutiny, the detectives faced the challenge of untangling a web of lies, motives, and opportunity. They needed more concrete evidence to determine whether one or both of them were responsible for William's death. As they continued their investigation, they hoped that the next piece of the puzzle would bring them closer to the truth. Just as the detectives felt they were closing in on a resolution, another twist emerged. Ethan Moore, a private investigator, came forward with new information that shook the case. Moore had been hired by William several months before his death. William had suspected Rachel of having an affair and wanted proof. Moore had been following Rachel for weeks and had gathered substantial evidence of her infidelity, including photos and recordings of her secret meetings with Andrew. But what was more shocking was the revelation that William had confronted Rachel about the affair just days before his death. According to Moore, William had been devastated by the betrayal and was considering filing for divorce. He had already met with a lawyer to discuss the possibility of protecting his assets from Rachel. Moore's report included emails and text messages between William and his attorney, in which William expressed his determination to cut Rachel out of his will and ensure that she received nothing in the event of a divorce. This revelation added a new dimension to the case. If Rachel had known about William's plans to divorce her and disinherit her, she would have had a powerful motive to ensure that he didn't live long enough to carry them out. Armed with this new information, the detectives decided to bring Rachel in for questioning once again. This time, they confronted her with the evidence of her affair, the potential divorce, and the fact that William had already taken steps to disinherit her. Rachel's reaction was telling. Her facade of grief and innocence began to crumble. In a heated exchange, Rachel admitted to the affair and to knowing about William's plans for divorce, but she continued to deny any involvement in his death. However, her composure faltered when the detectives presented the toxicology report and the evidence of the poison that had been found in William's system. Rachel struggled to explain how the poison could have been administered, and her story became increasingly contradictory. It was at this point that Andrew, realizing the gravity of the situation, decided to cut his losses and turn on Rachel. He provided the detectives with a series of emails and text messages in which Rachel had discussed her plan to poison William. According to Andrew, Rachel had been the mastermind behind the plot, convincing him that it was the only way they could be together without facing public disgrace. The evidence against Rachel was overwhelming. Poison, the affair, the motive of preventing a divorce. All of it painted a clear picture of premeditated murder. Rachel was arrested and charged with the murder of her husband, William Thompson. The trial of Rachel Thompson became a media sensation, with reporters flocking to Franklin to cover the shocking story of betrayal, greed, and murder. Throughout the trial, prosecution painted a damning picture of Rachel as a woman driven by financial desperation and a desire to escape her crumbling marriage. It presented the text messages, emails, and toxicology reports as irrefutable evidence that Rachel had conspired to murder her husband. Andrew Parker, now a key witness for the prosecution, testified against Rachel in exchange for a reduced sentence. On the stand, he recounted in detail how Rachel had orchestrated the plan to poison William. He described her growing frustration with her marriage, her fear of being left with nothing in a divorce, and her willingness to go to extreme lengths to secure her future with Andrew. His testimony was the final nail in Rachel's coffin. The defense attempted to portray Rachel as a victim of circumstance, claiming that her actions were born out of emotional distress and fear of losing everything. They argued that Andrew had manipulated her, playing on her vulnerabilities to push her toward a desperate and irrational act. However, the jury remained unconvinced. After several weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned a verdict. Rachel Thompson was found guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Andrew, who had cooperated with the authorities and testified against Rachel, received a lesser sentence of 20 years for his role in the conspiracy. His reputation and career were destroyed. He would spend the next 2 decades behind bars, haunted by his involvement in the deadly scheme. As the trial came to a close, the town of Franklin was left to grapple with the aftermath of the tragedy. The Thompson family, once a pillar of the community, had been torn apart by greed, betrayal, and murder. The memory of William Thompson, a beloved businessman and family man, would forever be overshadowed by the dark and twisted circumstances surrounding his death. For Detective Emily Taylor and Detective David Collins, the case had been one of the most challenging of their careers. They had unraveled a web of lies, deceit, and hidden motives, ultimately bringing justice to a man whose life had been cut short by those closest to him. As they left the courtroom, the detectives reflected on the case. While justice had been served, the story of William Thompson's murder was a stark reminder of the lengths people would go to when driven by desperation and greed. And in the quiet town of Franklin, life would never be the same.